I tried to warn a car dealership. They were charging an elderly couple 18% interest when their sign said 0%. So they threw my keys around like a football until the fob shattered, then deflated my tires while the owner filmed my humiliation. But I pulled out my state inspector badge and discovered they'd been running a fraud ring for 20 years, targeting elderly and immigrants with the owner, using my dead grandfather's training manual to teach his staff how to forge signatures. And he started following me everywhere in a Honda, identical to mine, until his own daughter found the evidence that brought down 6 dealerships. I'm the state inspector who shut down 6 car dealerships last year for fraud. Last Saturday, I was shopping for a new car at Premier Auto. I was wearing old jeans and an old Tame Impala hoodie. The place was packed, which seemed promising. While I waited, I noticed someone helping this elderly couple. The help in question? Telling them that the APR is 18%. Meanwhile, the banner outside the office window said it was 0%. I politely waved down the salesman, a college-aged boy with too much hair gel. Hey, I noticed your sign says 0%, but that couple is getting 18. Just thought you should know. He rolled his eyes. Sir, we know how to sell cars. We've been in business for 20 years. I tried to explain the legalities behind deceit, but he walked away mid-sentence. 5 minutes later, the finance manager showed up. Some muscled guy in his 30s with a gold chain and tight polo shirt. Look, buddy, he said, why don't you stick to your video games and let us handle the car business? We don't need some kid telling us how to do our jobs. I kept my cool. I'm just pointing out that your advertised rate doesn't match what you're charging. He laughed, loud enough for other customers to hear. You millennials think you know everything because you read some Reddit post? I've been selling cars since before you could drive. Other shoppers started staring. He was loving the attention. Then things got physical. He snatched my Honda keys right off the desk where I'd set them. Without a word, he tossed them across the showroom to Jake. My stomach dropped. They started playing catch while I tried to intercept. Other salesmen joined in, forming a circle. My keys flew back and forth over my head while they laughed. I felt like I was back in middle school getting picked on or something. After about 30 seconds of this humiliation, Jake threw them extra hard to another guy who missed. The keys smashed into the marble floor, and the fob split open, pieces scattering. My hands were shaking as I got on my knees to gather the broken pieces. That's when someone's foot kicked my coffee cup. It wasn't subtle. Brown liquid splashed across my shoes and pooled on the white tile. The salesman stepped around me like I was invisible, tracking coffee footprints everywhere. My face burned with embarrassment and rage. If you don't like how we do business, there's a used car lot down the street for people like you. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. That's when the owner Deet appeared. He took one look at me kneeling on his floor and shook his head. He whispered something to security, then turned to address the entire showroom. This is what happens when we let anyone walk in here thinking they know our business better than us. Security grabbed my shoulder and pulled me to my feet. The guard was huge, probably 6'4", and his grip hurt. He marched me toward the exit while the sales team applauded. Literally applauded. Some customers looked uncomfortable, but nobody said anything. My legs felt weak. The humiliation was suffocating. They shoved me out the door so hard I stumbled, but they weren't done. I was trying to tape my key fob back together when 3 salesmen surrounded my Honda. My heart started racing. Jake had a valve stem tool. I watched him crouch by my front tire and unscrew the cap. The hissing started immediately. Other customers in the lot were watching, but the salesman didn't care. I couldn't believe this was happening. In broad daylight. Within minutes, both drivers' side tires were completely flat. My car listed sadly to one side. They walked back inside, high-fiving each other. Through the giant windows, I could see the entire sales team lined up, phones out, recording my humiliation. Deet was in the middle, arms crossed, smiling like he'd won something. I stood there for a moment with 2 flat tires, broken key fob, and coffee-soaked shoes. My whole body was trembling, not from fear, from pure, controlled rage, until I smiled and reached into my back pocket. The walk back to that showroom felt like slow motion. The same security guard tried to block me. I flipped open my leather badge wallet and showed my official inspector credentials. His whole demeanor changed instantly. The blood drained from his face. I pushed past him and walked straight to Deet. The showroom went silent. My voice was perfectly calm when I spoke. State Automotive Inspector, and you just failed your surprise inspection. Congratulations. Deet's coffee mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. He started stammering about misunderstandings, but it was too late. I had already documented everything, and I was ready to destroy them. The inspector's tablet was already in my hand, the official state inspection app loading as Deet's face went from smug to panicked. His hands fumbled for his phone while I started documenting the elderly couple's contract still visible on the finance manager's desk. Get the lawyer on the phone, Deet shouted at his assistant, his voice cracking. The speakerphone crackled to life in the suddenly silent showroom. What kind of trouble now, Deet? The lawyer's tired voice filled the space. Just another inspection issue. Standard practices stuff. Nothing we haven't handled before. The words hung in the air. Standard practices. Every customer in earshot turned to stare. I kept my expression neutral while typing notes, but inside I felt the familiar satisfaction of a case building itself. The security guard who'd manhandled me moments earlier approached with shaking hands. Sir, I didn't know you were state. My shoulder. Did I hurt? His voice trailed off as I rolled up my sleeve, revealing the already forming bruise from his grip. I angled my phone camera, making sure the dealership logo was visible in the background of each photo. The images uploaded instantly to my supervisor's secure server. Jake tried to edge toward the door, the valve stem tool still visible in his back pocket. In his panic, he knocked it loose. The metal tool clattered across the showroom floor, spinning to a stop at the feet of a young mother holding her toddler. She looked down at it, then at my flat tires visible through the window, and her face hardened with understanding. I pressed my supervisor's number, keeping the phone on speaker. Rodriguez here. I'm at Premier Auto, license number 7829. We have an active situation involving assault on a state official, destruction of state property, and preliminary evidence of systematic rate fraud. The finance manager's face went white. He spun toward his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. The deletion was obvious, desperate. Several customers had their phones out now, recording everything. One woman in her 20s was typing rapidly, and I caught a glimpse of her screen, a blog post already forming with the title, Premier Auto Fraud Exposed Live. The elderly couple shuffled forward, the wife clutching her phone. Inspector, this is our contract. 18%, just like you heard. Her husband's hands shook as he pointed to the window. That sign says 0. We asked about it, but they said we didn't qualify. I photographed their contract, noting the signatures and dates. Deet stepped between us, his coffee-stained shoes squeaking on the tile. This is all a misunderstanding. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Chen, we can work something out. You know we support the community, the Youth Baseball League. The rate is 18%, Mrs. Chen said firmly. You told us it was the best you could do. The showroom erupted. 2 salespeople headed for the exits. The receptionist was crying. Customers who'd been in various stages of negotiation started demanding to see their paperwork. Deet's phone rang again, his wife this time. In his panic, he hadn't taken it off speaker. Honey, I need Davidson's number. The lawyer, not the accountant. Quick, his voice was high, stressed. Daddy? A teenage girl's voice came through. I'm in your office doing homework. What's happening? Everyone's running around. Deet's face crumpled. Sophie, sweetheart, just stay in the office. Don't come out here. But Sophie was already opening the door, backpack in hand. She froze at the chaos, customers shouting, staff fleeing, her father standing in spilled coffee while a state inspector documented everything. Dad, I made a decision. Miss, you should gather your things. This is an active investigation. She nodded, eyes wide, and I followed her to the office. Deet tried to intervene, but I held up a hand. I'm ensuring a minor's safety during an official action. Sophie grabbed her textbooks from the desk, knocking over a filing box in her haste. Papers scattered across the floor. Employee complaints, dating back years. Unfair commission structures, forced to lie about rates, threatened with termination for refusing to overcharge. Each one signed, dated, ignored. Oh my God, Sophie whispered, reading over my shoulder as I photographed each document. Dad, these people, they said you made them. Deet rushed in, falling to his knees beside his daughter. daughter. Sophie, baby, it's not. This is how business works. Competition is tough. We have to stay afloat. The baseball league, the church donations, your college fund, it all comes from this. His daughter pulled away. By cheating people, the finance manager appeared in the doorway. Deet, we need to coordinate our statements. The inspector is trying to twist everything. Twist? I kept my voice level. Your own employees documented these practices. Jake pushed past the finance manager. This is insane. Deet, tell them how you always pushed us to jack up the rates. Tell them about the bonuses for whoever could get the highest margins. I tried to warn you this would happen. Shut up, Jake, the finance manager snarled. No, I'm done. Jake's voice cracked. I told you using the valve stems was too far. I told you someday we'd hit the wrong person. There's something really interesting about how quickly everyone turns on each other once that badge comes out. Jake suddenly remembers all his warnings, and the finance manager's trying to coordinate stories while Sophie's finding years of employee complaints just sitting in a box. But you said it was funny. Said it would teach people to mind their own business. I continued documenting, my tablet capturing every admission. On the finance manager's desk, partially hidden under a coffee mug, I spotted altered contracts, numbers whited out and rewritten, signatures that didn't match, evidence in plain sight, but I needed a warrant to officially collect them. Everyone calm down. Deet tried to regain control. The inspector is just doing his job. We'll cooperate fully. He turned to me, attempting a smile. Why don't we step into my office? Discuss this professionally. I'll need to finish my preliminary inspection first, I replied, heading toward the customer bathroom. Behind me, I heard Deet hiss to someone about checking the security footage. In the bathroom, I made quick notes about what I'd observed, preparing my initial report. The door burst open. The finance manager with his phone extended. Got him. He's in here planning something, probably planting evidence. I washed my hands calmly. I'm using the facilities during a lengthy inspection. That's not illegal, but Deet was already spinning it. You see? He comes in here, causes chaos, assaults our security, and now he's hiding in the bathroom cooking up more lies. This is targeted harassment. Back in the showroom, the local news blogger was interviewing customers. The elderly couple stood firm, showing their contract to anyone who asked. Other customers compared paperwork, finding similar discrepancies. The 0% banner mocked us all from the window. My phone buzzed. A text from my supervisor. Chamber of Commerce president just called. Says you're disrupting a pillar of the community. Tread carefully. I looked around the showroom. Deet on his phone with lawyers. His daughter crying in the office. Staff turning on each other. Customers demanding answers. The finance manager deleting files. Jake spilling secrets to save himself. Security footage being reviewed. Evidence everywhere but protocols to follow. The weight of what came next settled on my shoulders. This wasn't just about one dealership anymore. Deet's standard practices comment to his lawyer suggested a network. The blogger's posts were already spreading on social media. The chamber president's quick response meant political pressure was coming. I thought about the 6 dealerships I'd shut down last year. Each investigation took months, destroyed livelihoods, sent ripples through communities. But I also remembered the families who'd lost thousands to predatory lending, the elderly customers who'd trusted these businesses with their life savings. Sophie Deet emerged from the office with her backpack, carefully stepping around the spilled coffee and broken ceramic. She paused at the door, looking back at her father. Mom always said your success came too easy, she said quietly. Now I know why. Deet's face crumbled as his daughter left. The finance manager was still frantically deleting files. Jake stood apart from the group, realizing he'd already said too much. The elderly couple waited patiently to give their statement, and I stood in the center of it all, tablet in hand, knowing this was only the beginning. My phone rang. Rodriguez again. The director wants to see you Monday morning. Says there's concerns about your methods, disrupting local businesses without proper cause. The chamber president is filing a formal complaint. I looked at my tablet full of evidence. The altered contracts, the employee complaints, the admissions caught on customer videos, the standard practices comment to the lawyer. All of it would mean nothing if I was pulled off the case. Understood, I told Rodriguez. I'll have my preliminary report ready. As I prepared to leave, Deet approached one last time. His earlier panic had crystallized into something harder. You think you're some kind of hero? You just cost 50 people their jobs, 50 families who depend on this dealership. The only person who cost them jobs is you, I replied. When you decided fraud was a business model. He leaned in close, coffee breath and expensive cologne. You have no idea who you're messing with. I've been in this community for 20 years. I know everyone. And by Monday, everyone will know about you too. The inspector who gets off on destroying local businesses. I met his eyes steadily. Then I guess we both have work to do this weekend. Walking back to my Honda with its flat tires, I could feel dozens of eyes on me. Some sympathetic, some hostile, all waiting to see what happened next. The valve stem tool still lay on the showroom floor where Jake had dropped it. Evidence of their petty harassment that had exposed something much bigger. As I called for a tow truck, my phone buzzed with notifications. The blogger's post was going viral. Save Premier Auto was already trending locally. Comments poured in, some calling me a hero, others painting me as a government bully attacking small business. This was how it always started. The initial discovery, the panic, the counterattack, but this time felt different. Deet wasn't just another crooked dealer. He had connections, resources, and a daughter who'd seen him for what he really was. He had everything to lose, and apparently, so did I. The tow truck driver arrived within 20 minutes, a grizzled man in his 50s who took one look at my deflated tires and shook his head. He loaded my Honda onto the flatbed while I stood there, still processing everything that had happened. My phone continued buzzing with notifications, but I ignored them. I had work to do. Back at my apartment that evening, I spread out all my documentation across the dining table. Photos of the bruise on my shoulder, screenshots of the elderly couple's contract, images of the employee complaints scattered on Deet's office floor, the valve stem tool on the showroom floor, every piece of evidence methodically organized and backed up to multiple cloud servers. My laptop screen glowed as I typed up my preliminary report. Each violation had to be documented precisely, following state protocols to the letter. Any deviation from procedure would give Deet's lawyers ammunition to challenge the entire investigation. I worked through the night, fueled by instant coffee and determination. Sunday morning arrived with more complications. My neighbor knocked on my door, looking uncomfortable. She explained that her son played on the youth baseball team Deet sponsored. The coach had already sent out an email warning parents that funding might disappear if the dealership faced troubles. She asked if I could maybe ease up on the investigation. I explained that fraud was fraud, regardless of community contributions. She left without another word, but I could see the judgment in her eyes. The coffee shop I frequented every morning suddenly felt different when I walked in Monday. The barista, usually chatty, barely made eye contact as she prepared my usual order. I noticed Deet sitting in the corner booth, my regular spot, sipping an espresso and scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I entered, raising his cup in a mock toast. The message was clear. This was his territory. I took my coffee to go and headed to the state office for my meeting with the director. The usually bustling hallways seemed quieter, conversations stopping as I passed. Word traveled fast in our department. Everyone knew about the Chamber of Commerce complaint. The director's office felt smaller than usual. She sat behind her desk, fingers steepled, while the deputy director occupied the chair beside her. They'd already reviewed my preliminary report, but their expressions gave nothing away. The meeting lasted 2 hours. They questioned every decision, every action, every piece of evidence. They reminded me about proper procedures, about the importance of maintaining good relationships with local businesses, about the delicate balance between enforcement and community support. I defended my actions methodically, but I could feel the political pressure bearing down. The director finally announced that while my investigation could continue, I would need to file daily progress reports and CC the legal department on all correspondence. Any further action against Premier Auto would require pre-approval. They were putting me on a leash. Leaving the office, I found Rodriguez waiting in the hallway. He pulled me aside, glancing around to ensure we were alone. He warned me that Deet had been making calls all weekend. The dealership owner had connections throughout the state government, people who owed him favors. Rodriguez Rodriguez advised me to be careful, to watch my back. He wanted to help more, but his wife had just started a new job at a bank that financed cars through Premier Auto. He couldn't risk her position. The next few days became a careful dance. I continued my investigation within the strict parameters set by my director, filing freedom of information requests for Diet's other business licenses. What I found made my stomach turn. Shell companies layered upon shell companies, all leading back to Diet, but structured to minimize liability. The same pattern of fraud appeared across multiple used car lots throughout the county. Public records showed customer complaints spanning 5 years, all featuring similar stories. Advertised rates that mysteriously increased, hidden fees appearing at signing, contracts with terms that didn't match verbal agreements. The pattern was undeniable, but proving intentional fraud required more than just complaints. I started visiting the addresses listed for these other businesses. Most were small lots in less affluent neighborhoods, targeting customers with poor credit who had few options. The salespeople at these locations were nervous when I appeared, clearly warned about my investigation. But they were also tired, worn down by years of being forced to deceive customers. Some wanted to talk, but were too scared. One afternoon, while reviewing public social media posts about Premier Auto, I discovered something interesting. Diet's playing the victim card, while his finance manager's literally deleting evidence right in front of everyone. That's an interesting strategy when you've got customers comparing their contracts and finding the same tricks everywhere. Makes me wonder how he thought this would play out differently. Jake, the salesman who deflated my tires, had posted Instagram photos bragging about his commission checks. The posts dated back months, showing amounts that didn't match the modest sales figures Premier Auto reported to the state. Either Jake was lying about his income, or the dealership was underreporting sales to avoid taxes. I screenshot everything, adding it to my growing file. But as I worked, I noticed something troubling. My own social media accounts were being monitored. Anonymous accounts had started following me, screenshotting my old posts, particularly one from 2 years ago, where I'd praised Premier Auto's community service before I knew about their fraud. Diet's team was building their own file on me. The psychological warfare intensified. Diet started appearing everywhere I went. The gym, the grocery store, the dry cleaners, always maintaining legal distance, never speaking to me, just making his presence known. He'd switched from his luxury sedan to a Honda identical to mine, parking it in spots where I'd see it. The message was clear. He was watching, waiting, applying pressure. My supervisor called me in for another meeting. Someone had filed a complaint about my surveillance of Premier Auto, claiming I'd been stalking the business after hours. Security footage from neighboring businesses showed my car driving past the dealership multiple times. What they didn't show was that I was following proper investigative protocols, documenting the comings and goings, looking for patterns. But context didn't matter. The complaint was formal, part of my permanent record. I tried reaching out to former Premier Auto employees, hoping someone would break ranks. Most refused to return my calls. The few who did speak made it clear they'd been threatened with lawsuits if they violated their non-disclosure agreements. Diet had been thorough in protecting himself. Then I caught a break. Through a freedom of information request, I discovered that Premier Auto's longtime accountant had quit abruptly 6 months ago. Her name was Maria Burt, and she'd worked there for 8 years before leaving without notice. I tracked down her new employer, a small tax preparation firm across town. Maria was reluctant to meet, but eventually agreed to coffee at a shop far from both our offices. She arrived nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. She explained that she documented concerns about the dealership's practices in a private spreadsheet, tracking discrepancies between advertised rates and actual contracts. She'd tried raising these concerns with Diet, but he dismissed them as misunderstandings. Before leaving Premier Auto, she'd saved her files to a shared cloud drive, forgetting that her access hadn't been revoked. She gave me the login information, warning me to download everything quickly before they realized the security lapse. I thanked her, but she grabbed my arm as I stood to leave. She warned me about the finance manager, Tom McRobert. He had gambling debts, serious ones. Diet knew about them and used them as leverage. Tom wasn't just complicit, he was desperate. That evening, I accessed the cloud drive from a secure connection. The files were extensive. Maria had documented everything. Inflated prices, altered contracts, forged signatures. One file showed that the worst contracts, the ones with the most egregious terms, had signatures that didn't match Diet's usual style. Someone was forging his name on the most problematic deals. I downloaded everything, knowing I was technically accessing private business documents without a warrant, but I also knew this evidence was crucial. I'd have to find a legal way to introduce it later, but for now, I needed to understand the full scope of the fraud. The next morning brought a new complication. An administrative judge had been assigned to review my investigation, specifically examining whether my actions constituted a personal vendetta against Premier Auto. The judge would have access to all my reports, all the complaints filed against me, and all the social media posts Diet's team had collected. My entire career was now under scrutiny. I needed allies, but they were becoming scarce. My former partner at another agency, Daniel, worked for a bank that financed Premier Auto's inventory. When I reached out for information about their lending practices, he was torn. He wanted to help, but couldn't risk his job. His daughter had just started college, and he needed the income. He provided what information he could, hints about irregularities in Premier's financing applications, but refused to go on record. The investigation was taking its toll on more than just me. I learned that the state had launched an audit of Maria Burt's new employer, claiming irregularities in their filings. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Maria called me in tears, saying her boss blamed her for bringing trouble to their door. Her marriage was suffering as her husband questioned why she'd gotten involved with shady people. I felt the weight of responsibility. My investigation was destroying innocent lives, people whose only crime was trying to do the right thing. But I couldn't stop, not when I knew how many customers had been defrauded over the years. I decided to take a different approach. Instead of pursuing Premier Auto directly, I started investigating Diet's mentor, the previous owner who died 3 years ago. Public records revealed that Robert O'Robert had faced similar fraud allegations throughout his career, but had always managed to avoid prosecution. He'd trained Diet in the business, passing on not just ownership, but apparently his fraudulent practices as well. This context mattered. If Diet had been trained to believe these practices were industry standard, it complicated the question of intent. Criminal fraud required knowing deception. If Diet genuinely believed he was just playing by the rules he'd been taught, prosecution became more difficult. But my sympathy had limits. I'd seen the elderly couples, the single mothers, the young families all deceived by Premier Auto's practices. Whether Diet believed he was following industry standards or not, people were being hurt. The pressure continued to mount. My credit card started getting declined, even though I hadn't exceeded my limits. When I called the companies, they claimed suspicious activity on my accounts, forcing me to spend hours verifying transactions. My internet service mysteriously disconnected, requiring multiple technician visits to resolve. Small harassments, each deniable, but the pattern was clear. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Tom McRobert, the finance manager, reached out through an intermediary. He wanted to meet privately, away from the dealership. We met at a gym across town where he claimed to work out. He looked terrible, bags under his eyes, hands shaking slightly, the swagger from our first encounter completely gone. He explained his situation in rushed whispers between sets on the weight bench. The gambling debts were worse than Maria had known. He owed money to people who didn't accept payment plans. Diet had offered to help, but the price was compliance. Tom had been altering contracts, inflating rates, adding hidden fees. But recently, he'd gone further. He'd been forging Diet's signature on the worst deals, trying to protect his boss while still meeting the demands for higher profits. Tom was trapped between Diet and his creditors, with no good options. He wanted out, but didn't know how. I saw an opportunity. If Tom would cooperate with the investigation, provide evidence of the systematic fraud, we could build a solid case. But Tom was terrified. He'd seen what happened to people who crossed Diet. I gave him my card, telling him to think about it. As he left the gym, I noticed he was limping slightly. He mentioned something about a recent accident, but the way he said it made clear it wasn't accidental at all. The stakes were escalating beyond simple business fraud. People were getting hurt, families were being destroyed, and the web of corruption seemed to grow with each thread I pulled. My supervisor warned me that the state attorney general was now involved, setting a deadline for my investigation. I had 48 hours to compile my evidence and present a case worth pursuing, or the whole thing would be shut down. Working around the clock, I organized everything. The contracts, the complaints, Maria's spreadsheets, Tom's potential testimony. But I knew it wasn't enough. I needed something definitive, something that proved intent to defraud rather than just bad business practices. That's when I made a decision that would haunt me. I reached out to Tom again, this time with a different approach. I explained that his family's safety mattered more than any investigation, but if he didn't cooperate, I'd ensure the state looked very closely at his personal finances, his tax returns, his gambling connections. I wasn't proud of using his desperation against him, but I was running out of options. Tom broke. He agreed to provide a recorded statement about Premier Auto's practices, about Dietz' knowledge of the fraud, about the systematic deception of customers. But he had one condition. His family needed to be relocated before he'd testify. I agreed, knowing I was making promises I might not be able to keep. The recording session took place in a hotel room across town. Tom's hands shook as he detailed years of fraudulent practices. He explained how Dietz would set impossible sales targets, then look the other way when his team used deceptive tactics to meet them. He described the bonus structure that rewarded whoever extracted the most profit from customers. He admitted to forging signatures, altering contracts, and destroying complaints. But he also painted a complex picture of Dietz, a man who genuinely believed he was building something important for the community. Why is Tom suddenly spilling everything to someone investigating his boss? The guy goes from terrified of Dietz to recording detailed confessions in a hotel room. Something about this whole flip feels too convenient for everyone involved right now. Someone who saw the fraud as a necessary evil to maintain jobs, support local causes, and achieve his version of the American dream. Tom's testimony revealed not a cartoon villain, but a flawed human who'd lost his way. As I listened to Tom's confession, I realized something disturbing. Years ago, when I'd bought my first car, I'd gone to a dealership owned by Robert O'Robert, Dietz's mentor. Looking back at my old paperwork, I discovered discrepancies I'd never noticed. I'd been a victim of the same fraud I was now investigating, too young and naive to realize it at the time. The revelation shook me. This wasn't just about protecting future customers, it was personal. But that made it even more important to handle the investigation properly. I couldn't let my own victimization cloud my judgment. With Tom's testimony secured, I compiled my final report. The evidence was overwhelming. Systematic fraud spanning years, affecting hundreds of customers, totaling millions in overcharges. But it also revealed the human cost on both sides. Employees forced to choose between their ethics and their livelihoods. A business owner who'd convinced himself that supporting the community justified deceiving its members. Innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. As the 48-hour deadline approached, I submitted everything to the Attorney General's office. The evidence clearly showed fraudulent practices, but proving criminal intent remained challenging. Dietz could argue he was following industry standards learned from his mentor. The forged signatures complicated matters, as Tom's confession implicated himself more than Dietz. The response came quickly. The state would pursue the case, but with a focus on regulatory violations rather than criminal charges. Premier Auto would face fines, mandatory reforms, and oversight, but Dietz wouldn't face jail time. It felt like a hollow victory. The announcement triggered immediate reactions. Some in the community celebrated, seeing justice for years of deceptive practices. Others mourned the potential loss of jobs and community support. The divide was sharp and painful. Dietz's response was measured. He held a press conference, accepting responsibility while maintaining he'd always intended to serve his customers fairly. He announced reforms, promised transparency, and committed to making things right. But his eyes, when they met mine across the crowded room, held a different message. This wasn't over. The formal proceedings would take months, but the immediate impact was clear. Premier Auto's sales plummeted. Some staff quit, others were let go. The youth baseball team lost its sponsor. The ripple effects spread throughout the community, affecting people who'd never bought a car from Dietz. I returned to my regular duties, but nothing felt the same. Other dealers viewed me with suspicion. Colleagues kept their distance. My supervisor made it clear that while I'd done my job, the political cost had been high. My next performance review would reflect the disruption I caused. Tom McRobert disappeared. His family relocated, but he never showed up to provide formal testimony. Without his cooperation, the criminal case weakened further. I heard rumors he'd reached an understanding with his creditors, facilitated by someone with deep pockets. The implications were clear, but unprovable. Maria Burt's accounting firm survived the audit, but barely. She sent me a message saying she didn't regret helping, but couldn't afford to be involved further. Her family came first. I understood, but felt the isolation growing. Through it all, Dietz adapted. He hired consultants, implemented new systems, and slowly rebuilt his reputation. He positioned himself as a reformed businessman who'd learned from his mistakes. The narrative was shifting, and I watched helplessly as public opinion softened toward him. My own reputation, meanwhile, suffered. Social media painted me as an overzealous inspector who destroyed a community pillar over technical violations. The fact that hundreds of customers had been overcharged got lost in the noise about job losses and discontinued sponsorships. Late one evening, reviewing the case files one last time before archiving them, I found something I'd missed. In Maria's spreadsheets, buried in the data, was evidence of a pattern I hadn't fully appreciated. The fraud wasn't random. It specifically targeted vulnerable populations. Elderly customers, recent immigrants, people with poor credit, those least likely to complain or understand their rights. This wasn't just business. It was predatory, deliberate, and cruel. But it was also too late. The case was settled, the penalties agreed upon. Dietz would pay fines, submit to oversight, but continue operating. The system had worked exactly as designed, protecting established interests while offering just enough accountability to maintain the illusion of justice. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by boxes of evidence that had consumed months of my life, and wondered if it had been worth it. Innocent people had suffered. Guilty parties had escaped real consequences. The community was divided, and the practices that had enabled the fraud, the culture of deception in auto sales, the exploitation of vulnerable customers, the protection of connected businessmen remained largely intact. But then I remembered Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who'd been charged 18% interest. She'd sent me a card thanking me for standing up for her and her husband. Inside, she'd written simply, "You gave us our dignity back." Maybe that was enough. Maybe changing the world happened one small victory at a time, one elderly couple protected, one fraudulent practice exposed. The system was flawed, but that didn't mean we stopped trying to make it better. As I prepared for whatever came next, I knew Dietz was doing the same. Our battle was over, but the war between those who exploit and those who protect continued. I'd learned hard lessons about the cost of doing right, about the complexity of justice, about the price of integrity in a compromised world. The investigation had changed me. I was less naive, more careful, but also more determined, because now I knew the true cost of looking the other way, and that was a price I could never pay. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Premier Auto's franchise headquarters had launched their own internal review, worried about liability spreading to other locations. Their compliance officer arrived unannounced at my office, carrying boxes of documentation they'd discovered during their audit. The papers revealed something I hadn't expected. Training manuals from Robert O'Robert's era, explicitly instructing salespeople to use the exact tactics I'd been investigating. The compliance officer explained their position while spreading documents across my desk. They wanted distance from Dietz's practices, but also protection from broader scrutiny. The franchise agreement contained clauses about maintaining ethical standards that Dietz had clearly violated. They were prepared prepared to provide evidence, but only if their cooperation remained confidential. I reviewed the training materials, finding highlighted sections about maximizing customer investment and flexible rate interpretation. The language was carefully crafted to suggest fraud without explicitly stating it. Notes in the margins, written in O'Roberts' distinctive handwriting, made the intent clearer. One notation beside a section on advertised rates simply read, "For show only." This changed the complexity of the case. Deet hadn't just inherited a business, he'd inherited a system designed for deception. The franchise headquarters knew about these practices, but had looked away as long as profits flowed upward. Now, facing potential liability, they were ready to sacrifice one dealer to protect the network. The administrative hearing was scheduled for the following week. I spent days organizing evidence into a coherent narrative that showed both systematic fraud and the culture that enabled it. The challenge was presenting Deet as both perpetrator and product of a corrupted system without excusing his actions. 3 days before the hearing, Jake appeared at my apartment. He looked haggard, constantly checking over his shoulder. He explained that other salespeople were turning against each other, each trying to minimize their involvement. He wanted to testify, but needed assurance that his cooperation would be considered during any penalties. I made no promises, but took his statement, documenting his version of events. Jake's account revealed details I hadn't known. The valve stem incident wasn't spontaneous. They'd done it before to difficult customers. The commission structure was even more predatory than I'd realized, with bonuses specifically for selling unnecessary warranties and add-ons to elderly customers. He showed me text messages between salespeople celebrating their scores on vulnerable buyers. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and humid. The conference room at the state office building was packed beyond capacity. Other dealership owners occupied the front rows, their faces tense. Behind them sat former and current Premier Auto employees, some who'd quit in protest, others still hoping to save their jobs. Customers filled the remaining seats, elderly couples, young families, single parents who'd been overcharged. Deet entered with his legal team, but the confident swagger was gone. His suit hung loose on his frame, evidence of weight loss from stress. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged papers at the respondent's table. When our eyes met, I saw something unexpected, not anger or defiance, but exhaustion. The hearing officer called the room to order. I presented my evidence methodically, starting with the Chen's contract and building to the systematic nature of the fraud. Each document projected on the screen showed another layer of deception. Tom vanishing right before formal testimony feels awfully convenient for someone with deep pockets. Makes me wonder who really benefited from his sudden understanding with creditors. Definitely not the investigation that needed his witness statement to stick. The room was silent, except for the occasional gasp from audience members recognizing their own experiences in the evidence. When I presented the franchise training materials, several dealership owners in the front row shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't just about Deet anymore. It was about an entire industry's practices being exposed. The hearing officer's expression grew increasingly grave as the scope became clear. Jake took the stand next, his voice shaking as he corroborated my findings. He admitted to participating in the fraud, but emphasized how it was presented as normal business practice. He described the pressure to meet impossible targets, the culture of celebrating deception, the way ethical concerns were dismissed as naive. Other dealership owners watched him with barely concealed hostility. The most powerful moment came when the hearing officer asked Deet to respond. He stood slowly, gripping the table for support. His voice cracked as he began explaining his perspective. He talked about arriving in America with nothing, working at O'Roberts dealership as a teenager, learning that success required flexibility. He genuinely believed he was providing a service, helping people get cars they couldn't otherwise afford, supporting the community with jobs and sponsorships. His breakdown was complete when he described his daughter's reaction. Sophie had refused to speak to him since the investigation began. His wife had moved to her sister's house. The baseball team had found new sponsors who publicly distanced themselves from Premier Auto. Everything he'd built to create his American dream had crumbled, and he was only now understanding why. The hearing officer called a recess. In the hallway, I overheard conversations that revealed the investigation's wider impact. Other dealerships were preemptively changing their practices. Banks were reviewing their relationships with auto dealers. The state legislature was already drafting bills requiring transparent pricing in auto sales. When we reconvened, the hearing officer asked for my recommendation on penalties. This was the moment I dreaded. I could recommend shutting down Premier Auto completely, destroying 50 jobs, and removing a business from the community. Or I could suggest reform measures that might allow redemption. I thought about Mrs. Chen and all the others who'd been cheated, but I also thought about the employees who'd been trapped in a corrupt system, the community that would suffer from another empty building, the possibility that reform could create lasting change. I recommended comprehensive oversight, mandatory restitution to affected customers, and reformed business practices under state monitoring. Deet would be banned from any role in financing, but could maintain ownership if he complied with strict guidelines. The hearing officer's decision came 2 hours later. The commission would implement my recommendations with additional requirements. Premier Auto would undergo forensic auditing of all past sales. Affected customers would receive restitution with interest. The dealership would operate under state oversight for 5 years. All employees would undergo ethics training. Most significantly, the findings would be shared with other state agencies, likely triggering similar investigations elsewhere. As people filed out, the reactions were mixed. Some customers hugged each other, finally seeing justice. Some employees looked relieved, others worried about their futures. The other dealership owners huddled in concerned groups, surely planning their responses to increased scrutiny. Deet approached me in the parking lot. Up close, I could see how much the ordeal had aged him. He extended his hand, which I shook after a moment's hesitation. He thanked me for not recommending closure, for giving him a chance to make things right. He admitted he'd lost his way, that O'Roberts' teachings had corrupted his understanding of legitimate business. He promised to rebuild ethically, though he knew it would take years to restore trust. Returning to my office, I found my desk covered with new cases. My supervisor informed me that my work on Premier Auto had set precedents. Other states were requesting our investigation materials. The legislature was fast-tracking the transparency bills. Change was happening, slowly but genuinely. But over the following weeks, I monitored Premier Auto's transformation. They hired new management, implemented clear pricing, and began processing restitution claims. Some employees left for other dealerships, but many stayed, relieved to finally work ethically. Deet took a background role, focusing on rebuilding relationships with his family. The ripple effects continued. Maria Burt's accounting firm received new clients seeking ethical financial services. Tom McRobert entered treatment for gambling addiction, his testimony helping other finance managers come forward about similar pressures. Jake started working with consumer advocacy groups, teaching people how to recognize dealership deception. 3 months later, I received a letter from Sophie Deet. She thanked me for exposing the truth, saying it forced her father to confront who he'd become. Their relationship was slowly healing as he worked to make amends. She was studying consumer law, inspired to protect others from predatory business practices. The Chen family sent another card, this time with a photo from their grandson's graduation. They'd received their restitution and used it to help pay for his education. Mrs. Chen wrote that my actions had restored their faith in justice. The state eventually passed comprehensive auto sales reform, requiring transparent pricing and criminalizing bait and switch tactics. Other states followed suit. The franchise headquarters implemented nationwide policy changes. What started as one inspection had transformed an industry's practices. I returned to routine inspections, but with new perspective. Each case was an opportunity to protect consumers while understanding the human complexities behind business failures. The Premier Auto investigation had taught me that justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about creating systems that prevented future harm. My reputation evolved from the inspector who destroyed Premier Auto to the inspector who reformed auto auto sales. Dealers still watched me warily, but many privately admitted the changes were overdue. The adversarial relationship shifted toward cautious cooperation. The investigation's documents were archived, but its impact continued. Law schools used it as a case study. Consumer protection agencies cited it in training materials. The precedents established during the hearing guided future enforcement actions. Change happened slowly, systematically, one protection at a time. I still drove past Premier Auto occasionally. The 0% banner was gone, replaced with clear pricing displays. The showroom that had witnessed such chaos now operated transparently. Pete sometimes stood outside, older and grayer, watching customers receive honest service. We'd nod to each other, acknowledging our shared history. The cost had been high for everyone involved. Careers were disrupted, families strained, communities divided. But from that destruction came reconstruction. Better practices, stronger protections, and hope that business could be both profitable and ethical. The investigation had ended, but its legacy continued. Looking forward, I knew similar battles awaited. Other industries had their own O'Roberts, their own corrupted training, their own vulnerable victims. But now I had experience, precedent, and proof that change was possible. The war between exploitation and protection would never end, but each victory made the next battle easier. My Honda, repaired and running smoothly, carried me to new investigations. Each case brought new challenges, new resistance, new opportunities for reform. The work was hard, often thankless, sometimes dangerous. But remembering Mrs. Chen's dignity, Sophie's courage, and even Diet's eventual redemption made it worthwhile. The Premier Auto case had transformed from personal humiliation to professional triumph to something more complex, a recognition that justice lived in the space between punishment and redemption, between individual accountability and systemic reform. That understanding guided every investigation that followed. Thanks for reading this story with me. I hope you have a wonderful day. I will see you in the next one.